Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Enjoying the lovely sunny weather?
Well, if I was to be completely honest, it's a wee bit hot for me. Oh, hello. And I've got a fly in my room. I'm too English rose for this kind of weather.
Fair enough.
Too pale, yes. But no, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? Do you enjoy this hot weather?
I love the hot weather. Although I must admit, I was beginning to wilt at yesterday's funeral because I only own one cassock, and it was the thickest wool cassock I could buy, ready for nice cold winter churches.
Because for 49 weeks of the year, That's perfectly okay, isn't it?
It's perfectly okay, and it's only like 1 or 2 services a year. You get very hot.
David said that his robes had dried out by Tuesday from being sweated in on Sunday.
That almost sounds like too much information.
Well, it was.
Is that why he's not made it this morning?
Perhaps he's just melted. He's in a puddle somewhere. I've no idea where he is, but he's not with us, sadly. But he is okay, dear listener, in case you were concerned for his health. I don't know where he is, but he is fine, so that's good.
Must be some parochial emergency that he's been called away.
Quite possibly. Absolutely. I really wish that fly would go away. It's going to be flies or tractors would be my bet on interruption today. Or baptism bookings.
You just had one of those, didn't you?
Just had one of those.
I'm even going to unplug the phone.
Actually, now I've worked out how to turn the volume down on my phone, I will do that. Trouble is, I remember doing it, but then I never put it back up. Yeah, exactly. And then you realise that nobody's, it's amazing how no one rings when you got the phone. Anyway, there we are. Right.
Or have I frozen on your screen?
Oh, now it's making a noise while I turn it down. That's no good.
That's no good. See, we're just not focused with the rural dean here, are we?
No. It just goes to pot, doesn't it, without his presence?
Falling apart with all these distractions.
Right. Come on then. Read us the Gospel for the 8th Sunday after Trinity.
Pause.
Oh, see? Can't remember a thing. We've only done this 3,000 times. Sorry, Harry. We'll try and pause.
My thought meant Harry's about to correct you on your numbering there.
Yeah, he might correct me underneath and say, woman, remember the pause. That fly is well annoying. Right. Okay, now read, please.
So today we're jumping to John's Gospel, but actually reading the bit that was omitted in the section we omitted in Mark's Gospel last Sunday, which is really confusing.
Very clear now.
Very clear. John chapter 6. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he'd given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, got in a boat, and started across the lake to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The lake became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the lake and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land towards which they were going.
Hmm.
There you go. I've read it. Your first comments, Joe.
I'm really intrigued by the detail that's there. So I was very interested about the fact that we were told that there was lots of grass. So, and that there was, I'm trying to find the actual line. Because they were all sitting down, weren't they? And they said that there was a grassy, there was a great deal of grass in this place. So they sat down, about 5,000 in all. I mean, it's interesting that why would the gospel writer remind us that there's grass there? I just find that really intriguing. And I think the other thing I find very interesting is verse 15, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew to the mountains by himself. And who is they? Is that the crowd? Because they are so aware of what he's been doing. Because the verse before says the people saw the sign that had been done and began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who's come into the world." So they're recognizing that Jesus is the one they've been waiting for. So it's almost like the crowd who he's just fed are about to hijack him and make him king, and he has to run away from the crowd, which is intriguing because I don't think that comes in any other of the other 3 Gospels.
No, although generally, isn't that also part of, I know we're reading John today, of what we often call this Markan secret. Jesus says, "Don't tell anybody."
Yes.
Because he was afraid of the crowds, and because, like you say, he wanted to come and make him king. But I think actually, I mentioned this in my sermon last week, is Jesus was becoming really popular because he was healing the sick, because he was preaching good news. And, you know, if all your ailments are suddenly healed, then human instinct says you're going to want more of that.
Absolutely.
And so he became really, really popular. And there, you know, because last week it was he kept trying to withdraw to himself.
Yeah.
Places are quiet. It's the detail I find strange in here is what the disciples playing out after this, the end of the walking on the water story.
Yeah.
It says Jesus went to the mountain on his own.
Yeah.
Didn't he? Where is it? Well, when he came to take him by force, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And then when it was evening, the disciples went down to the lake, got in a boat, and started to go home. Well, what's deserting Jesus? Oh, we'll just leave Jesus on his own. He's up in the mountain. We don't. You know, well, why would you leave your friend? Wouldn't you go and say, "Look, we're going back over the boat now. It's several miles across the lake." Is he supposed to walk around?
Well, no, but maybe he's trained them, because there is this pattern, isn't there? After he's done lots of teaching or performed miracles or healed the sick, he needs that rest and refreshment. So perhaps he trained them, you know, a bit like I trained my children that when mummy's office door is shut, you must knock, or as they like to do, pass notes onto the door. So you train, perhaps the disciples were trained that when Jesus withdrew, that he wasn't to be disturbed. So they just thought, oh, well, he'll catch us up. But yeah, I agree. It's a bit odd, isn't it? Just abandoning him.
A bit odd. I mean, you let them row 3 or 4 miles. Now, 3 or 4 miles. My first thought is, how long is the Oxford and Cambridge boat race?
I don't know, but I think it's
about 5. 2, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. Well, it's funny because I was doing some calculations about rowing because I was rowing in the gym this morning, and I did 2,000 meters this morning, which is just over a mile.
1.5 mile.
Mile and a bit.
Mile and a bit.
So it was quite sweaty. I wouldn't have wanted to row. And that was just a machine. That wasn't a whole boat. But then I guess if you go gently, that's perhaps half an hour's work, 3 to 4 miles. I don't know.
Yeah, but even when a strong wind was blowing, unless it was blowing in the same direction.
That is true. Yes, and why are they rowing when the wind's blowing? Would they not? I guess maybe it's the... Yeah, you'd think they put the sail up. See?
And it was dark. How do they know which way to go in the dark?
Oh, it's all very odd. And then that fly is not long for this world, I tell you. Then Jesus appears walking on the water, and quite rightly they say they're completely terrified.
Yeah.
It's a busy old day, isn't it?
What's that other immediately? Yeah, they rode 3 or 4 miles.
I know.
Jesus turns up, they're scared. He gets in the boat. I mean, is that another Star Trek moment of the boat suddenly moves from the middle of the lake to the shore?
I hope so.
Or did Jesus wait until they nearly rowed to the shore anyway? They just hadn't realised it because it was dark. Why would the guy have written the word immediately?
I know. So it could be a complete miracle. Literally, like you say, Star Trek.
Or is it? And all of that is just a story about the disciples going, almost, you could argue, the disciples going home from work at the end of a long day.
You're telling me that this is the account of their commute?
You mean you don't get in a boat to row from one parish to another?
Sadly, no. But I guess if I had a lakeside parish, maybe I would. But yes.
Would. We'll get you an appointment on the Isle of Man or something, or the Isle of Wight.
It is intriguing. And that commentary, the bit in John, it doesn't have some of the stuff that we find. So in Matthew's account of Jesus walking on the water, Peter's then encouraged to get out, or Peter, I don't know if he's encouraged, he foolishly suggests that he might want to have a go too. And I guess we see the lesson is about faith and about not doubting. But all we're learning here from this bit is to not be afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it is an odd thing.
Jesus walked on the water. And we've not even mentioned the feeding of the 5,000, really.
I was just thinking that. I was thinking, here we are discussing rowing, just completely ignoring that he's previously fed 5,000, which, of course, as we know, is only the men. So that would have been probably nearer 10,000 potentially, once you count in the women and the children.
And the cynics among us would say, well, if you counted the women and the children, the women were the organised ones, and they probably all had sandwiches in their backpacks. The disciples probably never asked them.
It's really intriguing when you talk about the feeding of the 5,000, because there is that whole school of thought that actually this is not a miracle of feeding people, it's a modelling of sharing. You know, like we'll share what we've got and then everyone else produces, I think David terms it the baguette that was stuffed up their jumper. and everyone has a share.
Yeah.
Which is, but actually, you know, encouraging a crowd to share could be as much a miracle as conjuring up food for 10,000 people out of loaves of fishes.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about the propensity for humanity to not always be the most generous that we could be. Either way, yes. You know, either way, whether it's a miraculous conjuring up of food or whether it's a miraculous sharing of food, either way, it's a miracle. And something about everyone being included is really important.
And I always remember from my college days, what makes the feeding of the 5,000 even more important is the process that it's gone through is actually very much that's similar to the Eucharist at the Passover. Yeah. Jesus takes the bread and the fish, he blesses it, and gives that, and then distributes it.
Yeah. And the symbolism of the 12 baskets, I think, is for the 12 tribes of Israel. There's a sort of potential symbolism there. But I think for me, the feeding of the 5,000 is always about everyone being included, everyone being valued, everybody being taken care of.
Yeah.
And that actually is something we should be doing all the time. And I like that link to the Eucharist, because, the Eucharist ought to be something that is for everybody and is an inclusive thing, and all are welcome at the Lord's table.
Well, that's it. I mean, it was interesting looking at some of my Twitter feeds this last week, and there's been quite a lot of debate on, well, actually, the Eucharist is very much a membership-focused event and not inclusive of everybody, whereas, like, Evensong morning prayer is the one that's now open to all and not seen as a membership-based thing.
Yeah.
And yet, and I still can't decide what I think of that. Being quite Eucharistically centred, and it's the Eucharist that draws people to me. It's the Eucharist that draws people in, because that's where our forgiveness comes from. It's where Jesus dying on the cross came from. It's so central, and it's the bit that welcomes everybody. We can all share in this bread and wine of Jesus.
I often think about the Last Supper, and I guess my sort of inner picture in my imagination is always dominated by the art of the Last Supper, with the long table with all the disciples and Jesus sitting on one side, and us being invited to sit by sort of invitation of the artist to sit at the table. And the stained glass window in St Mary's, Beaminster, is that kind of depiction of the Last Supper behind the altar. And yet I think, when they were gathered together in the upper room, it's just so unlikely that it was just Jesus and the 12, because, there would have been servants there, presumably. There would have been people who'd been preparing the food. I just always imagine that there must have been more people than just the disciples.
Do you think Jesus had servants?
Just think there would have been more people. Well, there probably would have been women around, because we know that women form that kind of caregiving role for the disciples and the entourage. They were often funding the work of Jesus and the disciples, and also acting as the kind of, resource managers. I mean, it's just my hope, I guess. I just think that, so I always think that the Last Supper probably was more inclusive than the accounts suggest. Yeah, this is very interesting. But I think you're right that Eucharist is a membership only, because that's the rule of the church, that you can only receive communion if you're baptised and confirmed, in theory. I like to stretch it to baptised. But
it's legally only baptised now, isn't it?
Oh, is it? There you go then. But I would never refuse a hand that was stuck out.
No.
And I would never check, and it's a bit like it's like vaccine passports, isn't it? I wouldn't check for a baptism certificate at the point of distributing communion.
No, I always found when I started distributing the cup, a long time before organisation, actually it was one of the most humbling things I've ever done, and it still is, like you say, every hand that's put out, you can say, here is the bread of Christ broken for you, and the blood of Christ shed for you. And it's whether you like them or not, whether you know them or not, whether they're smart, whether they're scruffy, whether it's the first time in church, their 10,000th time in church, or whatever. It's a real humbling thought to every single individual that comes up. It's, here is the body and blood of Christ shed for you. And maybe that's the point of the feeding of the 5,000. The 5,000 is a big number, bigger than the population of the local town where I grew up, because that was only 4,000 people. It's there for everybody.
Yeah.
And maybe that 5,000 just represents the fact that it's a huge number and there for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how I would want to interpret that miracle, is exactly that this is for everybody. And you were saying about Jesus being popular, and then the message he was preaching was popular, and that was because it was for everybody. It wasn't just for those who had felt they'd earned it or were holy enough or had observed the law well enough. It was for absolutely everybody, Gentiles and Jews alike.
And all those people that sneaked up and thought, if only I can just touch the hem of his cloak, I'll be healed. So it wasn't Jesus seeking out who was worthy. It was these people seeking out Jesus to say, come and be healed. And Jesus just responded.
And if our admission to the Eucharist on a Sunday was through being worthy,
well, I wouldn't take it for a start.
Well, exactly. And that's why we pray, I'm not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under your table. You are the same Lord, whose nature is always to have mercy. So, it's about everybody being welcome.
I must admit, the more you read these words of our liturgy, the richer they are.
Absolutely.
You can get into the habit of just trotting off words, but actually they mean so much.
They do. They do, and they provide a structure and a framework for us to meet the living presence of God. And I'm always struck by those. As you say, for us who've led liturgy for a while, that they can become very, very, very familiar. But it's like reading the most familiar passages in the Bible. There's always something new. There's always something you notice it a different way, or you notice when you're praying the prayers, something sticks out to you that day because of what's been going on in the world, or all the things that you've done in the week.
And it's go on. I find it quite interesting because I always look at when I go to preach on a passage, what did I preach on 3 years ago when it was last in the lectionary, and 6 years ago, etc., and going back. And I always read it and think there's always something that I preached on 3 years ago that doesn't apply today, or doesn't quite a bit, or something else jumps out.
Yeah, definitely.
So whilst it might be a great basis of a starting point, it's never the ending point, because the Bible was a living document that applies today. Now, you could say for the last 15 months that a lot of our sermons have been framed around COVID, and in 3 years' time they won't be. So, yes, our circumstances change, but actually I think the Bible's a living book that speaks to us as individuals in the circumstances we are in.
Well, yeah, and that's why we do Rev Chat, isn't it? Because we believe that something about this document formed thousands of years ago is relevant to the life we're living every day, and that those values
and the effort we spend trying to reach people who don't come to church, who actually might find it interesting and relevant.
Absolutely.
Which is why we use all this big plethora of social media platforms that it's broadcast on, which are so good at remembering them all at the end of this recording.
I notice you've added TikTok to your repertoire.
I have. I've done some I've started on TikTok, and actually, to be fair, that arose out of talking to a wedding couple during wedding preparation. We were in a discussion as to how we involve younger people in church, and we were talking about a shorter attention span. And he said, "Well, look, if you just put a 60-second video on every day or every few days, we can sit down, we can watch that, give us a quick thought, and it's something to meditate on."
Well, that's a great invitation, isn't it?
So I thought, well, if that's his idea, I know he was a gentleman who grew up going to Sunday school, and it sounds like he saw an awful lot of his vicar when he was young, wherever he grew up, and he wanted to continue it. So I thought, I'll give it a go.
Excellent.
I've no idea how well it will work, but and my boys, when I told them I'd done 3 posts on TikTok last week, their jaws dropped. They goes, "Dad, you're not onto TikTok. That's not for you."
Do they have are there dances?
Oh, there's a whole
dance thing on TikTok.
And I think the first thing you got to be is not shocked by what some people do on TikTok.
Well, I'm not on TikTok, so I might have to install it just so I can find you, but good on you. Well done, you.
Yeah, because I think somebody said, because I put the link onto Facebook, I think somebody said you've got to have TikTok installed to watch it.
I don't know. My children aren't allowed TikTok because I'm a controlling person, but they watch plenty of TikTok on Instagram. So you must be able to see.
You must be able to.
You must be able to see it, but I don't know.
I'm still learning how to use it.
I think we're talking about pithy 60-second excitements. We've not been pithy or 60 seconds, so probably time to draw to a close. But thank you, Chris. It's been lovely chatting and exploring the feeding of the 5,000 with you. It's great.
Brilliant. And thank you, Jo. A very interesting morning.
Brilliant. We will see you again next week. We hope to have located the rector. Who knows? But we'll see you next week. And you can see us all over social media. But in the Beaminster Team, only on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and our website. So at Beaminster Team or BeaminsterTeamChurch.org. However, in the Eggardon and Colmers Benefice, you can
see us on the Eggardon and Colmers Benefice Facebook page, Eggardon and Colmers Benefice YouTube channel, the Eggardon and Colmers Church's website, and it's just the Rev Chris Grask on TikTok.
I can't wait. Oh, see you all very soon. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.